I never imagined that love and betrayal could exist in the same home I built with my own hands, but that's exactly what happened when I met Clara. I was 33, living in Austin, Texas, running a small but successful construction business, and proud of the 2-story house I designed myself. Every inch of it, from the oak floors to the backyard deck, had my sweat and soul in it. When I met Clara at a real estate networking event, she was charming, confident, and full of warmth that made even the loneliest evenings feel alive again. She told me she admired men who could build something from nothing, and I admit, hearing that flattery from a woman as beautiful as her felt like heaven. Our connection was fast and intoxicating. Within months, she was spending more nights at my place than her apartment, and soon after, she practically moved in. At first, everything felt right. The laughter, the morning coffee rituals, even the fights were small and forgivable. But over time, small things began to shift. She started talking about her mother, Evelyn, a lot. How wise she was, how she always knew what's best, how she managed all her father's finances after he died. It sounded innocent, until Evelyn started visiting every other weekend, slowly inserting herself into my life with fake kindness wrapped in judgmental smiles. "You've done well for yourself," she'd say, glancing around my house as though assessing its value. "But do you really think it's fair that my daughter has no ownership when she's living here full-time?" I laughed it off at first, thinking she was joking. But Clara didn't laugh. She agreed. That was the first red flag. I brushed it aside, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But soon, their conversations became secretive, happening behind closed doors or in hushed tones when I entered the room. One night, Clara casually asked if I'd ever consider adding her name to the property since, in her words, we're practically a family now. I told her no. It wasn't about trust, it was about principle. I'd built that house years before I met her, and I wasn't ready to give away something that represented my life's work. Her reaction was cold. No argument, no tears, just a long silence followed by a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. The following week, Evelyn came over unannounced while I was at work. I returned home to find both of them in the living room with a man I didn't recognize, some real estate lawyer they knew, discussing transfer agreements. My heart froze. They had actually planned a way to move ownership of my property without my consent. I walked in, calm on the outside but boiling inside, and asked what was going on. Evelyn said smoothly, "We're just preparing for the future, dear. Clara's name should be on the papers too. It's only fair since she's contributed to your home life." I told her in no uncertain terms to leave my house immediately. Clara tried to calm me down, saying it was just a discussion, but the look in her eyes told a different story. That night, she packed a bag and left to stay with her mother. I thought maybe a week apart would help things settle, but I was wrong. The following month, I received a legal notice claiming that Clara was entitled to half of my house under domestic partnership property rights. I was speechless. She had twisted our relationship into a legal weapon. I contacted my lawyer, furious and confused. He told me that while she had little claim without a marriage certificate, she could still attempt to sue for contribution-based compensation if she could prove she'd financially supported the household. And suddenly, everything started making sense. Her sudden interest in paying for groceries, utility bills, even small home improvements. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. I was being set up, and the worst part, I hadn't seen it coming. Nights became sleepless, my business suffered, and I began doubting my own instincts. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to lose my home to manipulation. I decided to fight back. Not through rage, but through precision. I started gathering every receipt, every payment record, every email proving the house was entirely mine. And as I pieced everything together, I discovered something shocking. Something that would turn the tables on both Clara and her mother forever.
The deeper I dug, the clearer the truth became, and what I found left me both disgusted and, strangely, calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. Clara and her mother had been planning this long before the first conversation about fairness. I found text messages in Clara's old tablet that she'd left synced to my Wi-Fi, messages between her and Evelyn discussing the right timing to talk about adding her name to the house, what legal steps to take, and even how to document proof that she was financially contributing. It wasn't love. It was a calculated move for ownership. I felt sick to my stomach. Every memory I had of her, every smile, every "I love you," every tender look, suddenly looked staged. I sat in my office staring at the walls, realizing that my entire relationship had been a setup. But instead of reacting with rage, I planned my counterattack quietly. My lawyer, a cone man named Derek, told me to gather everything – transaction histories, bank statements, even video evidence of me doing housework. If she's claiming contribution, he said, we'll show the court that the only thing she contributed was a headache. I started documenting everything meticulously. Then, one evening, as if the universe wanted to hand me my victory, I got a call from my accountant about a suspicious transfer request that had come through my joint credit card account, the one Clara convinced me to open for emergencies. Someone had tried to withdraw $15,000 from it into a new account. I immediately froze the card and asked for the account details. The new account was under Clara's name, but the mailing address was her mother's home in Dallas. That was it. The proof I needed of financial fraud. I didn't tell them what I knew. I wanted to see how far they'd go. For the next 2 weeks, Clara kept texting me about resolving things peacefully and just wanting what's fair. I ignored her until the court date arrived. On the day of the hearing, she showed up in a sleek beige dress, her mother beside her in pearls and a smug smile, as if they were walking into a business meeting they'd already won. I sat across the courtroom, calm, holding a thick folder of evidence. When the judge began, Clara's lawyer painted me as a manipulative man who'd used her daughter's emotional and financial support while keeping her financially vulnerable. Clara even pretended to tear up, saying she'd invested her heart and money into a home she thought was theirs. Evelyn played the sympathetic mother, nodding solemnly. I let them have their moment because I knew what was coming. When it was my turn, Derek stood up and spoke like a surgeon making a precise incision. He presented bank statements showing every house expense paid solely from my account since before Clara even met me. Then he produced the text messages, the ones where Clara and her mother discussed making her look like a contributor. The courtroom went silent. The judge raised his eyebrows, then looked directly at Clara. Derek wasn't done. He pulled out the transfer records of the $15,000 fraud attempt along with the credit card agreement showing her signature and the bank's confirmation that she'd authorized the withdrawal. Evelyn's face drained of color. Clara's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. It was over. The judge dismissed her claims immediately, labeling the case malicious and fraudulent. But I wasn't satisfied. I filed a counterclaim for attempted fraud, emotional distress, and legal costs. Clara broke down crying, begging me outside the courtroom to drop it. I looked her in the eyes. "You wanted fairness, right? This is fair." She ran to her mother, who glared at me like I was the villain. Maybe I was, but at least I was the villain who fought back. Over the next few weeks, word got around. Her friends stopped answering her calls, and she was quietly dropped from the real estate agency she worked for after they learned about the fraud case. Evelyn sold her own house to cover the legal penalties. Karma had arrived faster than I expected. But what no one knew yet was that I wasn't finished. I had one more move to make, one that would not only expose the full depth of their deceit, but also make sure they could never pull this kind of manipulation on anyone else again. Because while the legal victory was satisfying, I wanted something deeper. And that truth was waiting for me inside a hidden file I'd almost overlooked, a single email thread that revealed that Clara's mother had done this before with another man years ago. I wasn't their first target. I was supposed to be their final one.
After the court hearing, I thought I'd finally buried the worst of it, but that email thread I stumbled on kept haunting me. It was buried deep in a cloud backup linked to Clara's old Gmail, one she must have forgotten to log out of when she used my home computer months ago. The email chain was between her mother, Evelyn, and a man named Richard Lawson, dated 5 years earlier. The subject line read, "Regarding property transfer." My hands trembled as I clicked it open. The first message was from Richard, pleading with Evelyn to return his deed papers. Apparently, he had been in a relationship with her daughter, though at the time the name used wasn't Clara but Carmen. The tone was eerily familiar, desperation mixed with disbelief. The responses from Evelyn were colder than ice. She told the man that Carmen had earned her share and that he should be grateful for the love she gave. It hit me hard. These two women had done this before. Changing names, changing cities, preying on emotionally vulnerable men who owned property or had stable finances. I scrolled further and found attachments, fake documents, property transfer drafts, and even a fake engagement certificate used as proof of partnership. I felt my pulse quicken. They were professional manipulators. I forwarded the entire thread to my lawyer, and Derek's reply was immediate. "This changes everything." We handed it over to the police fraud division, and soon an investigation was opened not just for my case, but for past offenses too. I wasn't looking for vengeance anymore. I was looking for justice. But the more I saw, the darker it got. There were at least 3 other men, all from different states. One from Denver, one from Phoenix, and another from Florida, each with stories nearly identical to mine. Clara or Carmen or whatever alias she used had a pattern. Move fast, build emotional dependency, suggest joint accounts, push for legal entanglement, and when confronted, vanish with the help of her mother. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit took over when it became clear this was a multi-state operation. Evelyn and Claire were quietly placed under surveillance while I went about my life pretending nothing had changed. The emotional aftermath was heavy. My nights were restless, haunted by memories that mixed tenderness with disgust. I'd replay moments in my head, her laughter in the kitchen, her hand brushing mine, her pretending to care about the smallest things I loved, and then I'd remember the cold calculation behind it all. My trust in people had been shattered, but I refused to let them break me. Instead, I began rebuilding my focus again, pouring energy into work again, designing new projects, taking on clients who respected me for my craft. It was my therapy. But karma works in mysterious ways. One evening, while I was working late, Derek called. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. "They've been arrested." Apparently, Clara and Evelyn were caught attempting another scheme in Dallas, targeting a widower with a small estate. This time, undercover agents were posing as financial consultants. They had everything on record: phone calls, forged documents, even a hidden camera recording of Evelyn coaching her daughter on how to sound genuine. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in silence, feeling an odd mix of relief and sorrow. There was something tragic about seeing how far a mother and daughter had fallen, turning manipulation into a business model. When their trial began months later, I was asked to testify. Standing in the courtroom, I watched Clara walk in wearing a beige prison jumpsuit, her eyes tired and hollow. She didn't look like the confident woman who once claimed she loved me. She looked like someone who'd lost everything. Evelyn, still proud even in chains, glared at everyone, including her daughter. During my testimony, I described what they'd done, not with anger, but with precision, the way someone describes a crime scene. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she broke down, saying her mother had controlled her since she was a teenager, teaching her how to manipulate, how to survive using men. I wanted to feel pity, but I couldn't. She had chosen this path. The judge sentenced Evelyn to 12 years in prison for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Clara got 5, with the chance for parole after 3. It wasn't satisfaction that washed over me as the verdict was read. It was closure. Afterwards, I walked out into the sunlight, breathing deeply, realizing that my house, my peace, and my dignity were still mine. But deep down, I knew that some scars don't fade easily. Part of me would always be wary, always measuring people's motives. Still, I'd rather live with scars than chains. And as I stood there, looking up at the sky that had watched my whole downfall and rise, I promised myself that I'd never let betrayal define me again. But just when I thought everything was over, I got a call from an unknown number that would reopen the wounds I'd just begun to heal and pull me into a truth I wasn't prepared for.
The call came late on a Thursday evening, just as I was finishing dinner and closing my laptop. The number was unfamiliar, area code from California. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Mr. Harris?" a calm voice said. "This is Detective Ramirez from the Los Angeles Police Department. I believe you were involved in a fraud case involving Clara and Evelyn Moore." My chest tightened. It had been months since the sentencing. I said yes carefully, unsure of where this was going. He continued, "There's been a development. We recovered some additional material from a storage unit registered under Evelyn's maiden name. You were listed in some of the files and, well, there's something you should probably see in person." The next day, I flew out to LA. The detective met me in a small office stacked with boxes labeled Evidence 47B. Inside were photo albums, old IDs, birth certificates, and notebooks. Clara's name appeared under at least 3 different aliases: Carmen, Lily, and Isabel. And Evelyn had records dating back more than 15 years. They'd been doing this far longer than anyone thought. But what froze my blood wasn't the fake identities. It was a folder labeled Samuel. That was my name. Inside were printed photos of my house, my truck, even shots of me at the local grocery store, all dated before I'd ever met Clara. "Looks like you were targeted long before you met her," Ramirez said quietly. "They did background checks on financially stable men who owned unshared property. You weren't an accident. You were hand-picked." I sat back, my heart pounding. Every memory, every coincidence suddenly made sense. The way she happened to meet me at that networking event, how she seemed to know I built houses before I even mentioned it, how she called me her dream man after only a few dates. It was all scripted. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Ramirez added, "For what it's worth, she left a letter for you." He handed me a plain envelope sealed with cheap tape. Inside was a handwritten note in Clara's elegant script. "Sam, I don't expect forgiveness. I grew up watching my mother survive by taking from people. I never learned how to love without calculation until you. What we did was wrong, and I deserve what's coming. But know this, what I felt for you was real, even if I didn't deserve it. Please don't hate me forever. C." I stared at the letter for a long time, emotions colliding inside me like waves in a storm. Anger, sadness, pity, all blending into exhaustion. Maybe she meant it, maybe she didn't, but I realized it didn't matter. Forgiveness wasn't about her, it was about freeing myself from her shadow. I left the precinct, stepped into the California sunlight, and for the first time in months, felt no weight pressing down on my chest. Over the next year, life slowly rebuilt itself. I finished a big housing project near Austin, started mentoring young builders, and even reconnected with my sister, whom I drifted apart from during the chaos. Trust didn't return overnight, but piece by piece, I learned to open up again. Then, one afternoon, as I was overseeing a site, a young woman approached me with a folder of permits. She was a new city inspector, confident, honest eyes, nothing like Clara's performative charm. We got to talking about work, about architecture,
and somehow about the things we'd both been through. Her name was Julia, and she carried herself like someone who'd been hurt but refused to stay broken. I didn't fall in love right away. I was too guarded for that. But for the first time, I didn't feel fear when I smiled back. Months passed, and our friendship deepened naturally, without games, without manipulation. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the half-built homes we'd been working on, she asked, "Do you ever regret what happened back then?" I thought about it, then said, "Not anymore. It taught me to build better, not just houses, but boundaries." She laughed softly and said, "Well, that's a blueprint worth keeping." That night when I returned home, I looked around the same house that had once been at the center of so much chaos. The walls no longer whispered of betrayal. They echoed resilience. I poured myself a drink, sat on the back deck, and watched the stars shimmer above the dark Texas sky. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably serving her time, maybe reflecting, maybe not, but in that quiet moment, I didn't hate her. I didn't pity her either. I simply hoped she'd find a way to stop running from herself. As for Evelyn, I had heard she wasn't handling prison well, still trying to manipulate guards and inmates alike. Some people never change. I raised my glass to the night and whispered to no one in particular, "You tried to steal my house, but you ended up giving me something stronger. Clarity." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a brief second, I thought I heard laughter, faint and far away. Maybe from a version of myself who finally made it out of the storm. I smiled, took another sip, and let peace settle in for good. Because in the end, revenge wasn't what set me free. Truth did. And that truth would live within me, stronger than any wall, tougher than any roof. In the home I built, and in the man I finally became.